It's sometimes easy to forget just how many Megami Tensei games there are. Of course there's the ones that everyone knows about, like mainline SMT and the Persona games, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. If we were to peel back this layer ever so slightly, then you'd be flooded with an insane number of spin-off titles. There's the Digital Devil Saga duology, the Raidou titles, the classic Devil Summoner games, and many, many more. But the most impressive part about all of this to me is that nearly every single one of these games features a unique style and flair that you can't get anywhere else. Though this is mostly in terms of aesthetics, since gameplay-wise, these games do share a lot of similarities with each other, though with some new ideas implemented to shake up the experience. I'd say that the most unique spin-off in terms of core mechanics is the Raidou series, by nature of having real-time combat and using demons to interact with the environment. While the execution of this idea was somewhat mixed in the first game, I can at the very least compliment the ambition behind the project. I've tasted a lot of what this franchise was serving, but there was always one subsection of megaten that always eluded me. A series of games that I didn't know anything about, but it's well beloved by fans. Devil Survivor is one of the most unique spin-off titles in the entire Megami Tensei franchise. The game was initially released back in 2009 for the Nintendo DS, and much to my surprise, is actually a strategy game rather than a traditional JRPG affair. What's even more shocking to me is that despite it playing almost nothing like a standard SMT game, Devil Survivor is one of the most beloved games in the community. You can't go for 5 minutes without someone bringing up Devil Survivor, and while the passion is admirable, it can sometimes get a little grating. Believe it or not, Devil Survivor is the most requested game I have ever gotten on this channel, even more so than Persona 5 if I'm being honest. So seeing all of this positivity and praise surrounding this game definitely got me at least a little interested. Though part of me was a bit skeptical going into this one. I don't have any experience with tactic games aside from playing a little bit of a GBA Fire Emblem game about a decade ago. I think it was Sacred Stones for those curious. So I can only look at Devil Survivor from the perspective of a newcomer, so in today's video, we're going to pop my tactics game cherry and see what all the hubbub is about. But there are a few things to mention before we get started. Much like basically every game in this franchise, there are two versions of Devil Survivor. There's the original DS release and the 2011 3DS version subtitled Overclocked. It comes with all the standard stuff you'd expect. Better graphics, more demons, new skills, and new scenarios for certain endings. One of the most shocking additions to me was the inclusion of the Demon Compendium. Apparently this feature was absent from the original game, and considering how much demon fusion you should be doing, I can't imagine playing this game without it. For all intents and purposes, Overclocked is the version of the game you should play if you're torn between the two. I haven't played the original release yet, but since most of the additions are quality of life improvements rather than game-altering mechanics, then you should be good to just stick with Overclocked. Just like my other megaten reviews, this video is going to be full of spoilers. If you haven't played Devil Survivor yet and don't want the experience tainted for you, then you should go and play the game yourself before watching this video. Don't say I didn't warn you. With all of that out of the way, it's time we learn how to survive. The opening of Devil Survivor is pretty standard fare for this series. The game takes place in modern-day Tokyo. You play as a 17-year-old high school student named Kazuya, and it doesn't take us very long to be introduced to two of our classmates and close friends. There's the bubbly schoolgirl Yuzu, and the tech-savvy coder named Atsuro. One day, the three friends plan on meeting up with Kazuya's cousin Naoya, but he ended up flaking at the last minute. However, not before passing on these fancy modded 3DSs known as comps. While they look to be your standard communication devices, that couldn't be further from the truth, since upon taking a look inside the mailing application, the trio receives a threatening email which mentions a murder that's about to take place. Not thinking much on it, the kids quickly forget about it. But as it turns out, that mail was a warning, since at the exact time listed, a victim is found torn to shreds. It turns out that the email wasn't a fabrication, rather, a premonition. Atsuro tries to crack the comp's software, but unintentionally activates the demon summoning program. Once the trio defends themselves from the attackers, they realize that they're now able to summon and control demons of their own. And just in the nick of time too, since later that day, we learn that an entire demon outbreak is taking place. In response to this, the government quickly issues a city-wide lockdown, containing all the demons and humans unlucky enough to get trapped within the walls of Tokyo. While uncertainty and panic fills the hearts of our party, one thing is for certain, the peaceful days have ended. Now, it's time to survive. That's the basic premise of Devil Survivor, and if you were to ask me, it's a pretty good hook. The game's opening day is packed to the brim with character introductions, world building, and rule establishing, with a little gameplay tossed in to keep you from getting bored. It's very scattershot and unfocused. While this sounds like a critique, it's actually to the game's favor. You learn information at the same pace of these characters, and if it sounds overwhelming and confusing, that's because it was the intention. You're meant to embody these kids and sympathize with their plight. Imagine you're living a normal life, and then suddenly, over the course of one day, it turned completely upside down. Demons have broken into our world, and the government is forced to put the entire city on lockdown. The power is completely cut out, and it's every man for themselves. These kids now have to constantly watch over their shoulders to not get caught off guard by these vicious predators. And worst of all, there's no more cell phone service. All sense of normalcy is dismantled in a single day, so the best way to convey that is to throw the player into the fire. It reminds me a lot of what Nocturne was trying to do with its opening. Catch the player's attention, then reveal the truth behind the events over the course of the story. Even if you aren't the biggest fan of this type of storytelling, you at the very least are given some ample characterization of the first two party members. I really like how when Atsuro gets his comp, his first instinct is to try to crack into it and see what Naoya's got cooking. It's such a fun detail for this character, while also demonstrating that he has a knack for looking beyond the surface level, which plays a major part in his character's role for the main narrative. Yuzo and Atsuro also do a good job at demonstrating two different types of reactions to this catastrophic event. Yuzu is in a full panic. She's confused and lost as to what's going on, and wants nothing more than to go back to her old life. She's reluctant to fight demons and more so wants to leave it to the authorities, but when push comes to shove, she's able to put her foot down and defend herself. Atsuro takes a more analytical approach to the situation. He wants to get to the bottom of what's going on and believes that finding Naoya would be the ideal way to get those answers. While he is afraid and wants to stay out of trouble, he's notably in more control of his emotions and demonstrates rational thinking. This difference in thinking serves as an interesting contrast in personalities, and if you know anything about writing a compelling group, then contrast is key. If only I had the same compliment towards their voices. New to Devil Survivor Overclocked is the addition of voice acting, and to give credit where it's due, Atlas had some ambitious ideas with it. Nearly every line in the game is voiced, which to me is pretty impressive. And while I don't have a problem with the actors per se, the vocal direction is a bit strange. Atsuro sounds a little too wimpy for my liking, and some of Yuzu's inflections have her sound more annoyed than what the dialogue suggests. I got used to it, and there's even some performances that I unironically enjoy, but I'd say this is on the lower end spectrum of SMT English dubs. Again, not bad, but not my favorite. Oh right, this is a video game. Now that we know how the characters ended up in this situation, how do we survive the lockdown? How exactly do we play this game? The core gameplay of Devil Survivor can be divided up into two distinct sections. There's what I like to call the action element, and then there's the visual novel stuff. Alright, I'm about to do something crazy here that's probably never been done before. I'm going to compare Devil Survivor to Persona. Yep, I know, breaking new ground, as always. Just like in Persona, time management plays a large part in the core design. However, unlike that game, Devil Survivor takes place over the course of one in-game week. Every day starts at 9 in the morning and ends at around 10 at night. You essentially have just over 12 hours to do whatever you want depending on the day. Most important actions require time to commit, while there are certain other ones that take no time at all. Thankfully, they have the foresight to include this handy clock next to any action that'll consume some of your time, so you can plan ahead. So what exactly do you spend your time doing? It's pretty simple actually. You can either spend time talking to any member of the cast to learn more about them and develop their subplots, or you can participate in battles. Something to get out of the way right now is that you do not have time to see or do everything in one playthrough. It's not like Persona where it's possible to max out every social link and experience everything the game has to offer through careful planning or by using a guide. Time is finite in Devil Survivor, and sometimes schedules conflict. Let's say for example, you can pick between going to a battle, talking to Atsuro, or talking to Yuzu. Depending on your planning, you can do all three actions. However, there will be times after experiencing one event, another one, or even both, will close. It all depends on what exactly you prioritize. At the start of every in-game day, you receive a Laplace mail telling you about important events that you should likely experience, mostly battles involving key characters. However, sometimes these are completely unrelated conflicts. You won't really know unless you check them out for yourself. I highly recommend you take full advantage of the multiple save slots. The last thing you want to do is spend precious time on an event that doesn't amount to a whole lot. But then again, that's part of the experience, so make of that what you will. I don't want to go into too much detail about time management right now. I mostly just want to establish how the general structure of this game works. Trust me, I have a lot more to say about that stuff. But I mainly want to dive headfirst into the battles, since it's what you'll be spending most of your playtime doing. So, you get a notification that a battle is available and you hop right into it. So how exactly do we survive the devils? Rather than building a party consisting of human characters and demons, you instead have up to 4 different squads. Each squad leader is a human of your choice, and they'll be accompanied by whatever demons you have in your stock. During your turn, you'll be able to move your characters, perform an action with your leader, perform an action with your demon, and finally attack, assuming you're close enough to an enemy to engage. However, something that you're going to have to get used to is to how turn order is handled in this game. Rather than there being a distinct player turn and enemy turn, turn order instead is dictated by how many actions that unit took. For example, someone who only moves then end their turn will recover much faster than someone who uses multiple actions in one go. Getting attacked by an enemy will also push you further back in the turn order. The agility stat is completely irrelevant to your turn order, and only takes effect during combat. Speaking of which, once you walk up to an enemy and hit that engage button, you're thrusted into a combat system that we all know and love. Battles in Devil Survivor work off of a modified version of the press turn system featured in mainline SMT. Actually, it's more similar to the one more system now that I think about it. At the start of a skirmish, you pick what skills you want to use, and they'll be performed in the order of their agility stat. The player gets a chance to attack, then the enemy gets a chance to get revenge. It's classic stuff that we're used to seeing. In any other tactical game, skirmishes would end after only the first set of attacks, but since this is a megaten game, weakness exploits and critical hits play a large role in the combat. Whenever you strike an enemy with its weakness, then there's a chance that you'll earn an extra action. Once everyone has performed an action, a second round will start where the fighters with extra turns will have a second chance to do whatever they want before the skirmish ends. You may have noticed that I said there's a chance you'd get an extra turn. Yeah, for some reason, the extra turns you get from striking a weakness isn't guaranteed, which is a strange change to me. Part of what made press turn in the mainline game so good was that it had consistent rules. If an enemy had a weakness, then the player could take full advantage of it. Same is true for the enemy. If your team composition has a noticeable hole in it, then you're gonna have a much more difficult time. The game's encouraged careful party planning, so no better way to enforce it by having both positive and negative reinforcement. In Devil Survivor, striking an enemy's weakness doesn't feel nearly as rewarding to me, since there's no guarantee that I'll get an extra action. Finding a hole in the enemy's defense isn't as impactful as it once was, because the reward you get is inconsistent. There are times where you can exploit every enemy's weakness with an attack all skill, only to not be given an extra turn. This one change makes the press turn system inherently less rewarding, and I don't understand why it was made. While you can influence the likelihood of earning an extra turn by increasing your agility stat, the fact of the matter is, press turn has gone from being a consistent mechanic to rely on to an inconsistent one that's much less fun to play around with. I see this change as a detriment, especially in a strategy game setting. Isn't the whole point is that I get to choose who to attack with what character? So wouldn't it stand to reason that I should be rewarded for having a good team composition for that fight? Likewise, shouldn't I be punished for having bad positioning or lackluster defenses? Don't get me wrong, having a party without a weakness is still overall a good idea. The last thing you want is to get hit by your weakness and die because of it. It's just that by having your extra turns effectively be random, it makes for a much less interesting battle system. Devil Survivor's take on the press turn mechanic does have some unique ideas thrown in there. Mainly, it allows you to remove an enemy's extra turn by nullifying or resisting elements, but it comes off more as changes for the sake of change, rather than what would fit the game's design. I'm not upset because it's different, I'm disappointed because it's worse than what we had before. Even though I find this game's take on press turn to not be my style, the combat at the very least does offer some stuff that I like. The main goal with each encounter is to wipe out the other team as efficiently as possible, and you're rewarded for this with extra money and experience. It gives the players something to think about. While you can completely wipe out a squad just by killing the leader and instantly ending the fight, you won't get nearly the same amount of rewards as you could have by taking out the demons one at a time. This offers some fun on-the-fly decision making. Do I spend more of my resources taking out every demon on screen to get more rewards? Or do I just burst down the leader for the sake of surviving? While you might think that you should just always go after the leader, there is a secondary reason to consider farming the other enemies. One of the most recognizable parts of Devil Survivor is the amount of customization on offer. On top of every squad having 2 demons of your choosing, the squad leaders all have fully modular movesets. Sort of like Digital Devil Saga, but without nearly as much grinding and the trauma of ripping your comrades limb from limb. The flavor of the week this time is skill cracking. Skill cracking allows you to take specific skills from the enemies and make them your own. However, there is a small catch. Not only does every skill have a specific stat requirement, but only one party member can use any given skill at a time. For example, if I want to equip the protagonist with a skill like Holy Dance, not only do I have to have the right stats, but he can also be the only person to use that skill. The same applies to every skill in the game, including passives. At the start of a battle, you can choose what skills you want to crack. Keep in mind that whoever you assign to crack that skill is the only person you can use to obtain it. While the skill will be added to your skill stock and can be theoretically used by anyone, only the person assigned to cracking that skill should be the one to land the killing blow. You can assign multiple people to crack one skill, but that's an inefficient way of handling things. But the option is there in case there's one skill that you really want. Skill cracking is a pretty fun mechanic. It's quick, works like a breeze, and is easy to understand. A lot of what skill cracking wants to do is similar to the mantra system in the DDS games. Just like in that duology, the characters have a fully customizable skill set, and a large part of that game is going out of your way to get your hands on as many options as possible for future encounters and team compositions. However, between the two, I find skill cracking to be my preferred method of handling this idea. The main issue I have with the DDS games is that you're not just grinding to get skills for one character. You need to do it multiple times for everyone to stay up to speed. Sure, you don't need every character to learn every skill, but if you want to have extra options available to you, then you need to dedicate time to hunting enemies. DDS 1 was really bad at this, and while it was improved in the sequel, it's still not ideal. Skill cracking, on the other hand, is much more intuitive. Any character can crack any skill, and it's then added to a universal backlog. If I crack Bufu Dine from an enemy, I now have it for the rest of the game. Sure, only one person can use it at a time, and even then they need to meet the stat requirements, but I don't have to worry about cracking it however many more times. Skill cracking also has some inherently more decision making compared to buying mantra. You need to decide the enemy you want to crack the skill from, what skill you want, and the party member to do it. Sometimes a boss might have 2 skills that you want, so you have to make the decision as to which skill you think is better to have in the long run. While you can get every skill in the game, if you want to have some of the better ones early, you're gonna have to plan ahead. Skill cracking is a great mechanic, and it ranks fairly highly for me in terms of party customization methods. But for as well constructed as it is, there is one major flaw with the system that I'm completely unsure how it made it past the developers. There are a handful of fights in this game that feature AI-controlled party members. Most of the time, they're civilians that you're tasked with saving, but there are a couple of times when it's other demon tamers that fight alongside you. This is pretty cool, but unfortunately, it conflicts with the skill cracking system. This is because the AI party members can kill the demons you're trying to crack skills from. When that happens, then that skill goes right down the fucking drain, and it sucks. There's no way to change the AI's behavior in these fights, so they end up being a much bigger threat to your progression than the actual enemy. I get that this is only an issue for a handful of fights, but a flaw is a flaw. It's funny because Devil Survivor does show a willingness to let you control non-party members in one fight at the start of the game, so why couldn't all of them be like that? That way, we could get the benefits of having the temporary party members while also preventing this skill cracking issue. Damn, one small change and it's suddenly fixed. Crazy, right? Character customization in Devil Survivor is a little different than you might expect. In other SMT games, you have about 8 skill slots to work with, and you can have any type of skill you want to fill up. But in Devil Survivor, there's a clear division between skill types. There are command skills, which are your attacks and healing magic, as well as passive skills, which are reserved for your boosters and resist skills. This skill class system plays a large role in how you customize your party members and demons. There is a slight difference between the two, but I'll get to that in a second. The general gist of this is that every unit has a total of 7 skill slots to work with. You have 3 command skills, 3 passive skills, and 1 special slot. While this might seem inherently limiting at first, this divide is actually to the game's benefit. Devil Survivor encourages you to specialize and optimize character builds. You're meant to focus on specific damage types rather than being a jack of all trades. Have a character focused on dealing electric damage, one focused on physical, one focused on ailments and healing, and so on. Maybe toss on some secondary skills to cover all bases, and you should be good. This, combined with the fact that skills can only be placed on one character at a time, means that you'll end up having very distinct party members despite most of them being focused on dealing magic damage. I think having the passive skills be limited is a great idea especially. Passive skills have always been inherently more interesting to me in these games, so forcing you to pick only the ones you need for each build is a solid idea. You can't make a fully invincible team, but you can specialize in certain areas. I find that Devil Survivor does a good job of balancing player freedom and restrictions in a way that feels fair, and that's not even considering the special skills you get for both humans and demons. For humans, you get auto skills. These are passives that activate at the start of every skirmish, and most of them come with some pretty meaningful effects. You can double the MP cost of spells to make them stronger, guarantee physical hits on enemies, debuff the enemy's stats, and so on. The only thing that kinda sucks about auto skills is that they're pretty rare to get. You can only crack them from other demon tamers, and they show up in select story-related battles. If you see a demon tamer with an auto skill you don't have, then you should make cracking it your top priority. Auto skills are a pretty cool addition to the game, but it just kinda sucks how the really fun ones are locked away for most of the game. It's easy to fall into the trap of developing too much of an attachment to certain auto skills. You spend most of the game only using a handful of them, and because of this, once you start unlocking some of the more unconventional skills, you end up not wanting to try them out. I mean, you've already got this far without them, so why switch over now? Maybe you'll try them out for 1 or 2 fights, not see their immediate benefits, and then just go back to what you're used to. I think that there should have been a more even distribution of auto skills throughout the game, though I understand why this isn't the case. In the story, other demon tamers only become relevant about halfway through the game, and start to become more common during the last 2 in-game days. It's a weird case of the story influencing the core game design in a negative way. Introduce more auto skills early on, and we have to rewrite some of the story. Have demon tamers show up as they become relevant in the current script, and you're gonna be drip-fed auto skills. It's a catch-22, and is a dilemma that I haven't personally seen in this franchise at all. It's not the end of the world, but it's a bit annoying. For demons, there are race skills. This class of skill is pretty unique and is something that you have to consider whenever you construct a team. Race skills are primarily used on the battlefield to give yourself an advantage, either through some emergency healing, increasing the number of steps you can move, binding an enemy's movement, and many, many more. Using a race skill takes up that demon's action for the round, while also sending you even further back in the turn order, so there is a reason to not just spam them. However, some race skills are automatic, such as the ones that allow you to circumvent terrain on the map. I'm surprised Kazuya needs a whole ass demon to climb over a fence. I figured he could just do that himself, but whatever. Devil Survivor puts a large importance on race. You need to consider what race of demons you include on your team, and whether or not they have synergy with other demon races. Damn guys, why don't you just tell us what you really think? All jokes aside, racial skills play a large part in how you construct your team. For example, a character like Yuzu can only move 3 tiles compared to everyone else's 4, so to make up for that, you should give her Devil Speed to move farther, or even Chaos Wave to get extra range at the cost of losing out on extra turns. You have someone focused on magic damage? Equip them with Magic Yang and run a deity, and enjoy slaughtering your enemies in a single round. Tired of getting hit with ailments? Carry a Megami around to instantly cure it as well as heal your health. It even works at a range too, so you can cover your allies. One of my favorite combinations is the Vile and Kinshin race combo. I already mentioned how Chaos Wave lets you attack enemies from a distance, but Kinshin race demons let you attack twice in 1 turn, so you can make up for losing out on the extra turn icons. You can make some disgustingly overpowered builds with enough time and effort, which leads me to talking about one of my biggest issues with Devil Survivor, its difficulty. While I wouldn't call Devil Survivor a super easy game, it ended up being one of the more comfortable experiences for me. Far from innocent sin levels of brain-rotting mush, but it's not quite a strange journey if you catch my drift. I think part of that has to do with my experiences with this franchise in the past. Sure, I might not find the game to be all that hard since I've played other games, but someone just picking this game up for the first time will probably get stumped a few times, and I don't blame them either. I still remember the first time I played Persona 4 and getting stuck on the Shadow Mitsuo fight for days. And you know, I think saying this game's difficulty was about on par for Persona 4's for me is a pretty accurate comparison, both in terms of overall challenge and difficulty curve. The start of the game might catch you off guard, but as you rise through the ranks of Bell, the game only gets easier and easier until you unironically 2-hit the final boss. Whenever I ask for a game to be more difficult, it isn't because I'm trying to flex that I'm some god gamer or anything, because that's what my challenge run videos are for. It's because I feel as though most developers pull their punches a bit when it comes to how their mechanics can be applied. I get that it's so the less skilled players can have a good time too, but I feel as though that this comes at the cost of not properly rewarding skilled play. Devil Survivor is a strategy game that's meant to invoke the feeling of being in over your head. In the narrative, the lockdown is portrayed as incredibly cutthroat. Only the strongest are able to survive, and those who want to run and hide will be nothing but prey for their demon predators, or even their fellow man in some cases. You're meant to learn and adapt to this new scary environment. It's a sink or swim mentality. Either play by the rules of this new world or die trying. I think your core gameplay of your narrative-focused game should work to elevate that idea. Persona does this by making social links a core part of the experience. A game like Strange Journey also does this incredibly well through the use of the app system, tough but fair dungeon design, and rewarding combat system, assuming you're playing the good version. Devil Survivor had a great opportunity to demonstrate its themes through the core gameplay, but it sadly doesn't get capitalized on it all too well. It feels like the game doesn't expect the player to do a whole lot of team optimization, because when you do go out of your way to fuse some of the better demons with good skill synergy, then watch in awe at the kind of destruction you can cause. Dance skills are incredibly broken. On top of dealing decent damage, they have a chance of hitting the same enemy multiple times. Sure, it's technically random, but if you have the element boosters, all you need is for one or two of them to hit the squad leader to win the fight. Doubly so if you give the protagonist and all of his demons holy dance. But his damage doesn't even compare to what Otsuro can dish out. Despite the fact this kid probably hangs out on Reddit all day, Otsuro hits with the force of a freight train. While he starts off as a fairly average party member, once you get the berserk skill and the auto skill that makes his attacks never miss, then you've basically won the game. Not even the bosses stood much of a chance against this guy, and would go down in just a couple of hits. Man, fuck Kazuya. With the amount of damage he's doing, Otsuro should be the king of Bell. Yeah, Devil Survivor isn't that challenging. I can only think of a few encounters that gave me much trouble, and a lot of them were from the early game. There was the Wendigo fight because you're pretty underprepared for that one. The Belder boss took me 2 tries because of its gimmick, and then there's the 7th day boss on Naoya's route because I ran out of SP for healing. But anytime I got quote-unquote stuck, all I had to do was readjust my strategy or get some new demons, and this is coming from someone who has never played a tactics game in their life. So if I can do it, then you could probably do it too. Since I'm already talking about some of my grievances with Devil Survivor's design, I may as well go over some of the other bumpy parts. Alright, let's just rip off the bandage on this one. While the core mechanics of Devil Survivor are technically solid, there are some decisions made with the design surrounding them that didn't get the most amount of polish. Getting new demons in Devil Survivor is done through the demon auction system. Rather than talking to enemies directly and recruiting them to your team, you instead go online and bid on whatever's available to you. Or if you've got the money, then you can just outright buy a demon. It's a pretty novel concept, but I can't quite say that I prefer it to traditional demon negotiation. This is because I find that bidding on demons and such is a little too out of my control. In my experiences, I rarely won an auction by having all of the competitors drop out, and would rather score the hammer price by outbidding them through the final bid. To me, this made raising the bid myself feel like a waste of time, so I would eventually just end up sitting there waiting for the clock to run out before dropping some cash down. It's a fun idea, but it's unfortunately too simplistic for my liking. Also, does anyone else feel as though things cost too much in this game? Money makes the world go round, and Devil Survivor will sure as shit remind you of that. The Compendium prices in this game are insane, which makes doing complex fusion chains way more annoying than it should be. There's no items or equipment to buy, so all of your cash will be going into the demon fund. Because of that, there will be plenty of times where you have to grind out some free battles for money. I especially had to do this during the endgame, since I wanted to make sure I had a good enough team going into the final day. I get that I'm mostly to blame for doing this to myself, but keep in mind that I've never played this game before, so I had no idea how hard the final bosses were going into it. And since I had to replay all of these maps over and over to get money, I unfortunately took notice at how simplistic their designs are. Now this is probably going to be very contentious, but I think that the map design for this game is a bit on the weak side if I'm being honest. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the main appeal to the strategy RPG genre was how map navigation plays a large part in your success. You know, stuff like placing your units in the correct spot and making sure you have a backup plan in case things go wrong. While Devil Survivor's map design does encourage this to an extent, we unfortunately do end up with some rather lackluster layouts. We get some city streets, concert halls, and destroyed highways, and while they are realistic in how they're laid out, the thing about reality is that it doesn't make for the most compelling level design. Maps take on simple shapes, and usually offer a few paths to travel through and some obstacles you need to work around. In that sense, movement does require some thought, but it's never anything too strenuous. The most complex the map design gets is in the cemetery. There's one wide main path with a few side areas that not only act as shortcuts, but as choke points. And this is one of the first maps you come across. I get that this game's main focus is more so on the skirmishes themselves rather than the movement, but I don't know. I think I would have liked to have more complex areas to play around with, especially since a lot of these places end up getting reused throughout the game. But those are some small gripes I have in what is otherwise a solid foundation. It's more so a death by 1,000 needles than any main critical flaw. I liked what Devil Survivor was offering from a gameplay standpoint, but it definitely feels like a first crack at a new idea. This is part of the fun about looking at these games critically. You can see where the developers were the most passionate, and in this game's case, it's obviously how it managed to put a new spin on party customization and introducing a new style of gameplay. It's more so design elements surrounding those core mechanics that needed a few more drafts to really nail it. Now this is the part where I'll start talking about the other half of the gameplay experience, the more narrative-driven visual novel gameplay. But the thing is, a lot of this stuff goes hand in hand with the game's story, so it's hard to talk about this stuff without just diving right into the meat of the narrative. So for the sake of not repeating myself and making sure I move along at a brisk pace, I'll just be talking about both. In between battling, you're brought back to the overworld. From then on, you have about 12 hours to do whatever you want in-game. Since every action takes up half an hour of time, you have, on average, about 20 free actions per day to do whatever you want. Whether that be talking to a character, checking out a location, or engaging in battles, nearly every action takes time. However, how you end up spending time in Devil Survivor is what makes every playthrough unique. My run of Devil Survivor could be entirely different from your run, and not just from the sense of the route I ended up getting, but also in how the story is told. I compared the day-to-day life segments to the Persona games earlier, though that's admittedly only a surface level comparison. In Persona, all of your free time is spent doing optional stuff. Sure, doing social links, leveling up stats, and spending time with your party members is meaningful content, but every player will experience the same core events in the same order. While Devil Survivor does have this to an extent, an overwhelming majority of the game's content is technically optional. You don't have to check up on someone if you don't want to, or scope out an area if it doesn't interest you. While I won't go out and say that everything is optional, a good majority of this game's content is left up to the player to experience. But unless you're doing like a challenge run or something, then I highly suggest you go out of your way to talk to as many of these characters as possible. Doing so will not only allow you to learn more about them on an individual level, but it's also how you're going to connect the dots and form a better understanding of this story. Devil Survivor has a somewhat non-linear narrative. While you are guided into doing certain events, most of the story is left up to the player to piece together. Sometimes all you have to do is talk to one character a couple of times, while in other cases, their story is spread across different interactions. Let's take Haru for example. You meet this girl not too far into the journey. She's a vocalist for the band called Diva, and thanks to her synthesizer she got from one of her bandmates, Haru was able to summon demons. However, this has caused Haru to believe that she is responsible for the recent demon outbreak, and because of this, she's fallen into a deep suicidal depression. Depending on your actions, you'll be able to help Haru cope with these feelings and pull herself out of this rut, or she'll be pushed over the edge and take her own life. While you can get a decent amount of characterization from Haru's interactions alone, if you want to get the full picture, then you're gonna have to go out of your way to talk to Jin. This character is heavily tied into Haru's story, but at the same time is going through a struggle of his own. He was lovers with one of Haru's bandmates, though she would one day up and vanish without a trace. Jin dedicates his time to getting to the bottom of this mystery, and all evidence points to this having to do with the Shomenkai. Because of Jin's relationship with Aya, he ends up becoming Haru's guardian and looks after her. He doesn't have the heart to tell her about what actually happened to Aya, so part of his dedication to finding her is partially motivated by Haru. Something you'll notice early on about Devil Survivor is that characters not only have stories relating to themselves, but they have motivations that stem from other characters. This helps the world feel very alive and fleshed out. Characters, both major and minor, are interconnected, and by talking to either party, you can get a much more round view of them. Sometimes, seemingly disconnected stories end up crossing paths in a way that feel natural, despite technically being optional. A standout example to me is when the party learns of the government's contingency plan. It turns out that the government plans on wiping out everyone and everything in the lockdown using a device called the UEM wave as instructed by the Angels. However, since I managed to get the scene with Otsuro where he breaks into his online friend's comp and learns about the information himself, the dialogue is altered to reflect that. This is some really cool stuff, and it's honestly shocking how well some of these stories end up fitting together. While this feat is impressive, the storytelling itself doesn't come without any faults. One of my biggest complaints with Devil Survivor's narrative is how abrupt the pacing feels. There's a very stop and start sort of feel to the whole thing, and that's mostly due to how events have to be structured. Let's say you're very interested in going through one particular character's story, and you want to blast through it as fast as possible. Depending on how schedules line up, there might be a few times where you end up just sort of waiting around for interesting things to happen. The game doesn't necessarily tell you when spending time with one character or not will result in meaningful progression to their narrative, or if it's just a case of them shooting the shit. Since time is limited and schedules are tight, not having this information immediately conveyed makes planning around it a bitch and a half. Especially in a scenario where wasting time with an irrelevant hangout event causes you to miss important story beats for another character. This is the reason why I recommend you save as often as you can. You never know how long a character will be available for unless you're using a guide. So if you end up picking an event that ultimately doesn't amount to much, then it can technically be considered a waste of time. Devil Survivor asks you to spend your time wisely, but it can be kind of difficult to do that when you're not sure what spending your time actually amounts to. I had a constant anxiety playing this game that I was missing out on important story details, or side quests that are required to unlock routes on the final day. While the most important activities are highlighted at the start of the day, there are many smaller interactions that have a lot of weight to them that the game expects you to find on your own. And because of that, spending your time with a character like Honda is kind of pointless. Honda is a very interesting character to me. He's an everyman who's unfortunate enough to get caught in the lockdown and is desperate to find a way out, not just for his own good, but also so that he can be there to support his son who's about to go through a life or death surgery. Honda ends up joining a shady faction of demon tamers and works alongside them so that at some point he'll be able to find a way to break free from the lockdown. But the sick twist is that no matter what Honda does, his son passes away without even being able to say goodbye to his father. This causes him to snap, and he vows to destroy everyone and everything with his new powers, since life no longer has any meaning to him. It's a tragic story that reminds us of everything that's at stake here, and that some people are just one push away from completely going over the edge. But what sucks about all of this is that Honda doesn't have a route or ending of his own. Spending any amount of time with him is a total waste, since if you're gunning for the opportunity to have every ending available to you on the 6th day, you have to cut out unnecessary fat. Something that a lot of people take for granted when playing these games is that not everyone will know which characters are part of what alignment. Sure, there'll be a group of people who look up this stuff beforehand, but to me, it sort of goes against the intended experience. You're meant to interact with the characters that you find interesting, and it's up to the player to decide whether or not that character's story is worth following through to the end. Since Honda has no route tied to his character, aside from making an appearance in Yuzu's, spending time with him is a bad decision, and you'd be better off talking to almost any other character in the game, whether that be because they have a route that you can access, or because they have the potential of living or dying depending on your actions. Okay, so I've been mentioning this a couple of times, so I may as well explain it now. That clock you've been seeing above the character's head is called the death clock. This timer signifies how many days until that person is going to die. While it's acknowledged a lot in the story, where it becomes especially relevant is in the gameplay. The death clock is meant to help you decide who you want to spend your time with, since if you make the right actions, you'll be able to spare that character from a grim fate. While not every character is able to be killed off, a good handful of them are ripe for the picking. And since you won't know who exactly can die on a first-time playthrough, every conversation and decision made carries a lot of weight. especially if it involves a major character. Trust me, do whatever you can to keep Haru alive. If you fuck up and she's killed off, then you locked yourself out of getting nearly every ending in the game aside from the default bad ending. While I did manage to keep her alive, I unfortunately can't say the same thing about Keisuke. Keisuke is a character that I'm pretty mixed on in all honesty. He starts off as a relatively quiet guy that has a very strong sense of justice. This causes him to gravitate towards this cosplayer named Midori. Midori and Keisuke have a very similar moral compass. The only difference is that Midori has a much more childish view on the world thanks to her father. She views those abusing the powers of the comp for their own gain as criminals and sees herself as a vigilante working to protect the helpless. However, the people of Tokyo don't see it the same way. Looking for someone to use as a scapegoat for their fear, Midori is villainized by the people she's trying to protect, and they plan on killing her as a coping mechanism for their fear. I guess since Keisuke developed feelings for his cosplay girlfriend, he decides to go ultimate simp mode and enact his own justice on those he deems unworthy of living. He summons the demon Yama to judge the sinful people of Tokyo, and if they fall outside of his line of justice, they'll be killed. The game leaves it up to the player to try to convince Keisuke to stop the madness and rejoin the team, but if you're too late, he'll end up being killed by the leader of a gang. The thing that's really confusing about Keisuke's character to me is that his transformation from a man with a strong conviction and moral compass into a ruthless killer happens literally overnight. Sure, he was mad about the civilians for wanting to kill Midori before all of this, but the idea that Keisuke would harbor such deep hatred towards those people isn't conveyed all too well in the little time we get to have him in our party. However, I'm not sure how much of this is the game's fault, or if I'm the one to blame for this, since I'll fully admit that I didn't have the time to do all of Keisuke's side events. There are a few that I ended up missing, so maybe one of them went further into detail about all of this, but I didn't get the chance to see it because I was so focused on following the other threads in the game's narrative, which to me was far more important. This is probably the biggest double-edged sword when it comes to Devil Survivor's narrative structure. The game leaves it up to the player to decide what's worth their time experiencing and what's not. Because of this, you get the most out of the characters as the effort you put in. While it's impressive just how well these stories end up tying into each other, ultimately, it comes down to whether or not you're willing to accept that you're unable to experience all of it in the span of a single playthrough. Sure, this means that you can always have new content to look forward to coming back to the game, but it can be somewhat frustrating on a first-time playthrough when good character moments or important plot details are missed out on because you made the unfortunate decision to spend time with your cousin rather than going to the park. And I totally understand that this was the point. I get that you're meant to weigh up the pros and cons of your actions, and I would like to remind everyone that just because I take issues with some aspects of the storytelling, that doesn't mean that I think it's bad. Sure, I just spent a few paragraphs talking about some of the lesser qualities, but that's because I think that we should all acknowledge that nothing is perfect. In a lot of cases, in fact, it's those flaws and quirks that make a piece of art stand out amongst the crowd. And I can say that through my experiences, I haven't played any other game that handles main story content in the same way that Devil Survivor does. My compliments to the game's narrative doesn't end there either. Nearly every major character in the game has a lot going on under the hood. They all have wants, needs, regrets, motivations, and relationships with characters outside of the core party. Sure, it's a bit coincidental that nearly every major alignment character happens to be linked to each other, but the world building that comes from this more than offsets that fact. You don't want your characters to feel like they only exist for the sake of the main protagonist, so the best way to do that is to every once in a while show us who they hang out with. Yuzu knows Jin because she's a fan of Haru. Kaido has a crush on Miss Mari, who's Atsuro's tutor. The interconnected web of relationships in Devil Survivor help make these characters feel more real than if they were relegated simply to their story paths. While not every character is created equal, there's something to be said about the quality of this game's cast compared to most other SMT games. The world building in Devil Survivor is particularly strong. I especially like how much emphasis is placed on how the lockdown is affecting the everyman. Honda is a prime example of this, but beyond that, there's a lot of optional events that explore the different sides of humanity. There are people who've lost all hope, those who are fighting to survive while sticking to their moral compass, and some that are using this situation to their advantage, finding comps of their own and living selfish lives before everyone is wiped out in the lockdown. While a lot of SMT games focus on the world after humanity has fallen, not many show the literal downfall. The closest I can think of is Strange Journey, but that game handles it in a very different way than this one does. Strange Journey shows societal collapse through news reports and calls in between dungeons, while Devil Survivor places you in the thick of it. And despite SJ being one of my favorites in the series, part of me likes the portrayal of humanity a bit more here. Though, if you were to ask me, one of the best parts about Devil Survivor is just how solid the alignment system is in this game, both in terms of structure, as well as in the different endings you can get. During this past week, you and your party have been looking for a way to end the lockdown, and through communicating with the other survivors, a lot of possible outcomes have been thrown your way. Do you work with Jin and Haru to locate the source of the demon summoning program and permanently rid the world of all demons? Maybe you join forces with the Shomenkai and the Angels, becoming the new Messiah and ushering in a new era of God's rule. What if you decide to follow through with the battle for the throne, fulfilling your destiny by killing all the demons of Bel and obtaining almighty power? Enough to lead a rebellion against God and wage war for the calamity he brought upon Tokyo. There are a total of 5 different endings in Devil Survivor, and which ones you have access to depend on the choices you made leading up to the end of the 6th day. As long as you make sure to keep everyone alive and show some interest in their solutions, you'll have the option to follow through with the plan if you want. I originally wanted to get Atsuro's ending since it sounded pretty good on paper, but since Keisuke died in my playthrough, I ended up getting locked out. And thank God for that, since I later found out that this ending is one of the worst ones. Throughout the game, Atsuro brings up the possibility of taking control of the demon summoning server. This way we could end the lockdown while also making sure humanity can benefit from the demons. However, dumbass over here thinks it's a good idea to hand this powerful tool over to the government, which, might I remind you, is being run by the Angels. For a character that's so openly analytical and is anti-authority by nature, I find it very hard to believe that he would just openly do this. Maybe something got lost in translation, or is explained if Keisuke lives. But from everything that I've seen of this character throughout the game, I just don't buy it. Since my original choice was out of the question, I decided to go with Naoya's route, and I'm kinda glad that I did. Not just because I find it to be a better alternative to Amane's route, but because this is one of the scenarios that features some exclusive content in the overclocked version. Now, those who know this channel might remember that I have some opinions on the way Atlas expands their stories. Though I've heard through the grapevine that Devil Survivor is one of the better examples of how to do this properly. While I was skeptical going into the 8th day content, I came out rather surprised. Instead of doing what Strange Journey Redux does in altering the original ending, Devil Survivor Overclocked instead opts to elaborate on what exactly happens after the events of the ending. For example, in the original Naoya ending, the game ends on a haunting note. It's established that the protagonist has achieved the powers of Bel, and will now use that power to fight back against God's tyranny. However, the fate of this battle, and whether or not humanity will even survive it, is left uncertain. But by playing through the 8th day scenario in Overclocked, we get a much better picture as to what exactly went down during the ending. In fact, the 8th day in of itself changes depending on if you want to use your power to protect humanity, or rule over it with an iron fist. The same is true for every other route, and if you were to ask me, this is how it should be done. Instead of altering the core foundation of the story by including new characters or changing the message, we instead get more of what we enjoyed. Yeah, sure, there's something to be said about losing the ambiguity of the original endings, how they were more so think pieces to get your mind wandering, and how the drawbacks is what makes them interesting, but I would rather see them expand on these ideas instead of permanently tainting them with time travel or the inclusion of some memory-altering nonsense. And hey, if you like these characters, then you at least get a little more time with them. There's a lot to talk about with Devil Survivor, so much so that even now, almost an hour later, I feel as though I haven't scratched the surface of it yet. Sure, I didn't do the usual character breakdowns and analysis on every little bit of dialogue and ending, but for now, I feel as though I've gotten what I needed to say out there. Plus, I want you guys to play these games too. There's a decent sized portion of people that watch these videos and use it as a replacement for experiencing the games themselves. And while I am flattered by that, it's not something that I like to encourage. Especially in the case of Devil Survivor. While I might have sounded a bit negative throughout this video, ultimately, I still had a pretty good time. I enjoyed myself with the game, and I highly suggest you all check it out already if you haven't. But do I think it's the pinnacle of the S&T series and blows every other game out of the water? Nah, not really. But I do see why people fell in love with this one. It's got some fun and unique gameplay. The storytelling and character writing will keep you hooked from beginning to end. And there's a lot of replayability with this title, which is something that I've neglected to mention with these games. You're getting a lot of bang for your buck with Devil Survivor, and in that sense, I totally get the praise. When I look at Devil Survivor, I see something with a lot of potential. It's got a great foundation and is chock full of identity and purpose. However, there are just a few aspects of this game that chain it down from reaching its full greatness. A lot of this stems from the core gameplay. Difficulty balance and inconsistent mechanics hold it back more than I wish it did, and the open-ended structure of the narrative leads to some awkward moments where you just sort of wait around for interesting things to happen. But any and all faults end up being redeemed to me thanks to some satisfying payoffs in the narrative. I just wish that those faults were worked on just a little bit more, since if all of those blemishes were ironed out, Devil Survivor would be able to break free from those chains and truly soar. Hey everyone, thank you to making it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, then I would appreciate a like or a subscription. Or if you really enjoyed your time, then you could always join my Patreon or become a channel member, like the lovely folks you're seeing on screen now. I am forever grateful towards you people. You guys are the ones who are supporting me so I can keep doing what I'm doing, and I would not be here without any of you. I know I do this spiel all the time, but it seriously means a lot to me, and I don't think I make that clear enough. I had a lot of fun making this video. For the past while, I feel as though my scripting has been a little dry and formulaic, so I've been looking for ways to spice things up a bit. I've also been looking for ways to improve my workflow lately because I feel as though I'm not getting stuff done at the pace that I know I can do it at. I've been making small changes in my lifestyle to try to facilitate this, and so far, I feel as though it's been pretty successful. The turnaround time on this video was really fast compared to my other projects this year. I've actually had this one done for a while now, so I've just been using this extra time to chip away at some other projects I have on the backlog. In fact, I actually have 2 smaller videos just ready to go, so I'll be putting those ones out sometime in October. They're more experimental and broad compared to my standard reviews, so I don't think they'll have the biggest appeal, but hey, it's always good to do something strictly for yourself for a change, right? One of them is going to be focused on the Insomniac Spider-Man games because the sequel is coming out soon, and the other one is a Persona 5 related video. I'd rather not spoil what they're on about just yet, but I can assure you that you guys won't have to wait too long for those ones. In terms of my next big project, it'll most likely be on Final Fantasy X. I've already begun the script writing process for that video, and while I can't say exactly when it'll be done, I know I can at least get it out before the year is over. Depending on how long it takes, I'll probably end up making a video on Persona 5 Tactica beforehand. It just depends on how schedules line up. If you want to stay up to date with that and other upcoming videos, feel free to either follow my Twitter or join my Discord server. Both will be linked in the description. Once again, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.